Well, we've been looking at this concept of freedom here and there over the last few weeks as we've spent 5 weeks in the book or the letter to the church in Galatia. And we'll be finishing up there today. So if you need a little head start, if you're a little new to it or just have trouble finding that, we're going to look at the book of Galatians here in just a moment. But that concept of freedom has been throughout the letter. The idea that Jesus did all the work. He has established our freedom. He's thrown open the prison gate, so to speak, and invited us into this free life. But at the same time, the responsibility of living freely is up to us, and living freely is not an easy thing to do. So even though we're free, at times we look like we're imprisoned. And some of you have been set free, you've experienced this new life in Jesus, but yet as other people look at your life, they would be hard-pressed to find evidence of freedom. You seem to be bound up just as you were before, although it might look a little differently. And for instance, you might have been set free, but you've gone back into that idea of thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. And if I keep these rules, then God's going to like me. If I don't, he's going to do bad things to me. And that's just not the way it works. That's not what grace means, but that's at times what we get back into. But maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you've been set free, but now you're walking back into the places that God has set you free from. And you look as if you're almost imprisoned again. And although you have the freedom and God's empowered you with his Spirit to be able to overcome some of those things, some of you have allowed yourselves to go back into those dark spots. And so now you're imprisoned by the approval of other people or by substances or pornography or by just some sort of unhealthy relationship, and you just can't get out of those, and you're back in many ways to where you were before, but now you actually have the ability and you've been set free, but you've chosen to go back into that place. And that's not a new thing. It's been happening for thousands of years. And the church in this city called Galatia was going through the same stuff. The issues might have been a little different, but for the most part, same problem. How do we live as free people? And for some of them, the struggle was going back into this idea of a law-based religious system. And for others, it was, well, now I've been set free. I can do whatever I want. And after they do whatever they want, they abuse their freedom, so they lose their freedom, and now they're in chains to all this other stuff, some of it even more difficult than the things they knew before Jesus. And in that context, Paul's writing this letter to try to help this church family figure out how to live freely. And there are a lot of changes that are taking place. We've looked at a different one each week, and we're going to look at one last one today. So in Galatians chapter 6, the last chapter in this letter, Paul wrote, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live in the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Now, in the previous chapters, we've read that Paul said the greatest thing you can do to express the freedom that God has given you is to use your freedom to serve other people. Serve other people in the way that demonstrates love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, and other characteristics like that. He says that's the way you are to exercise the freedom so that you can remain free. And now he says, guys, if anyone gets caught, if anyone struggles, if anyone is messed up in a sin and you find out about it and it is exposed, make sure you restore this person gently. There's a clear reminder from Paul that sin is a heavy, heavy burden. And none of us is immune to it. All of us are guilty of it. We're all guilty of sinners. All have sinned and fallen short of God's glory. We've read that. Now, for some of you, you hide it much better than other people. And there are times when I sit or by some of you or I'm around some of you and I really wonder, has he or she ever sinned? Is it really a thing with them? Because it doesn't seem to be. You seem to have everything together. It happens to me in my house all the time. My wife will hiccup and excuse me to everyone in the entire room. I'm like, that is not worthy of an excuse me. A hiccup is just not a thing. And so my son's over there passing gas going, excuse me, like that on the other hand, like that. But there are moments where, oh, excuse me, I belched. You're like, come on. You don't make me want to share my struggles, because if that is where we are on the level of sensitivity, you're not going to want to hear this. And so there are times where we're around people and we feel like we're the only ones and we are the only messed up ones in the group. And it's just not true. We all struggle. We all sin. I try to envision my grandmothers saying something they shouldn't, or doing something, or having a lustful thought. I'm like, that's gross. Two, I don't think that ever probably happened with them, but we're all human, and that human nature arises in our lives and gives us that fight. And so it's real, and we all sin. He says, though, there are some times when your private struggles show up. And other people see them. Other people notice them. You're caught. You're seen. It's evident. Some of you know what that feels like. We all know what it feels like to be caught by a parent or our parents, where they find something, they read something, they hear something, or another parent calls and says, I heard this, or another parent texts and says, did you know this? And then we're confronted, and it's like, well, I don't know how to deny this one. And there's just a overwhelming sense of embarrassment and guilt and shame and defensiveness and anger, and all those emotions get wrapped up. And Paul said, when that happens inside your church, and it happened then, and 2,000 years later, almost 2,000 years later, it's happening as well in all the churches we're a part of. And you can't leave this and go to another church and find it not the case there. It's that case everywhere. When you're in that mess, he says, you as a spiritual family have an obligation to help restore them, to bring them back. And as you do that, restore them gently. And I don't think it's just him using words, just extra words. He needed to add something, so he said restore gently. I think there's purpose behind that. Because ultimately, we have to know the purpose of confronting, the purpose of dealing with stuff is always restoration. It's always to bring someone home. And in terms of freedom, I am obligated to help you get your freedom back. When it's clear that you're not free by the things you've done, by the things you've said, whether you're caught, whether you share it, whether it's a little combination of both, however it unfolds, I have an obligation as a part of your church family to help you get your freedom back. Because ultimately, all of us have been recreated in God's image to live the lives that we were supposed to live in the beginning, to live freely, to be able to have joy and not have to fake it, to be able to not have to worry about, am I going to stumble here? Am I going to fall into that again? Am I going to deal with that? But to be able to breathe easily and to rest and know that I can find peace in this moment. And that's the life that we're all supposed to live, and yet not all of us are living that way. Some of you are more sensitive than others, and you have these private struggles, and you're on your face before the Lord for every hiccup and every burp and everything else, and you're like, oh, Lord, I'm so sorry. And then you have that sensitivity, and let's just say it, and I guess how we say it, keep that spiritual energy. Like, just keep doing that. That's a good thing, I guess. There are others of you who are going, I hope no one finds out. I hope she doesn't read that. I hope he doesn't see that. I hope no one ever knows. I hope I can somehow get beyond that. And you live with that chasing you, following you all the time. That's not the way you're made to live. You say, well, yeah, but if it comes out, then there's a spiritual family that has an obligation to help restore you, to get you your freedom back. But as he wrote this, he said, be very careful, though, that you watch yourselves, because that could be you. That could be right where you are. And he goes on in verse 3 and says, if anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Wait a minute. Now, if you paid attention to both things we read, if you saw them on the screen, then you know at one point he said, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you're fulfilling the law of Christ. And now it says, because each one of us must carry our own load. Which one is it? Well, as he's writing to the church family, he's saying, in essence, you have a responsibility for your own freedom. And this word load is also translated in other places in the book of Acts as cargo on a ship. So you are responsible for what you take on your journey. You're responsible for your freedom. But even though it's no one else's fault, when you do lose your freedom, if that moment happens, There are people around you that have an obligation, a spiritual obligation, to help carry that burden for you, because none of us is strong enough to carry that burden alone. So it's my responsibility, what I carry in my faith journey, but I have an obligation to you to help you get your freedom back if you abuse it, if it's destroyed, if you lose it along the way. So Paul's pretty clear, but there's much more. And I don't think this letter is supposed to necessarily just stop with this thought and we move on. And I want to get to this next part of the letter here, verse 7. We've got what I believe is a pretty well-known thought, at least, whether you've quoted it or not. But at first glance, it seems like common sense. It's not really a spiritual thought. I mean, it's just, yeah, this would happen. It's like saying if you don't brush your teeth, you'll get cavities. Like, okay. Like, I didn't need a Bible verse for that. Like, I don't need any sort of honor your God with your mouth to know. Like, that's just a thing, right? It makes sense and it happens. So we've got this verse that seems to be just common sense, but he puts a little tag in there that helps us see that it's more than that. Let's read this together. Verse 7, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. So this idea that a man reaps what he sows, we've all heard that in some way, shape, or form. Like, if you do this, this is going to happen. If you do this, you're going to get this. If you work hard, then there's going to be a payoff. If you're lazy, you're not going to be able to achieve what those around you who work hard achieve. Like, we get all that. We've seen or heard the illustrations, at least, that you can't plant an apple seed and expect a banana tree. Like, okay, we don't need the Bible to figure that out. Like, we grasp all of that. But this is not just some ancient proverb that okay, that makes sense. It's more than that. And Paul wrote, do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And by putting that whole idea of mocking God, that changes everything. Because what he's saying is, if you plant seed for yourself, this selfish idea of rebelling against God's plan, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, I'm going to sow my own seed. When you do that, he said, in a way, you're mocking God. And that changes everything. But on the flip side of that, when you do follow through with God's plan, when you trust him enough to do what he asks you to do, in that way, you're standing with him, and there is a sense in which he is honored in that. So it goes beyond just this idea, if I plant this, I'm going to get this. If I plant that, I'm going to get that. It is God saying, I'm not going to be mocked in this. So let me give you just two simple phrases that help me at least work through that. And maybe it'll just help you remember along the way. First, rebellion is a loan. And by rebellion, I mean disobedience, sin, doing your thing instead of God's thing, selfishness. Rebellion is a loan. It's me saying, I am going to withdraw God's love, but I'm going to leave his justice behind. I'm going to trust that he loves me too much to do anything about that, so I am going to, in many ways, abuse his favor and love. He says he loves me. He says he sent Jesus to die for me, that he's going to forgive all my sins. Well, I'm just going to take that and see how far I can go with that. Because if I go over here, I mean, he loves me. He's not going to do anything. He's not going to, come down and throw a lightning bolt down or cast any spell on me. He's going to love me the way I am. And so we withdraw, we borrow his love, assuming his justice is never going to come. And this happened in the very beginning. The enemy came to the very first man and woman and said, did God really say that you would die if you ate that fruit? I mean, did he really say? In other words, he planted the seed that if he really loves you the way you think he does, if you've got this if you've got this relationship that's so close with your maker, then you know he's not going to do anything bad. Would he withhold anything from you if he really loved you? I mean, what is the big deal? If he loves you, then that's not going to happen. And it is still going on with us. And we look at each other and say, well, if you love me, you'll accept everything I do, everything I say, everywhere I go, all my thoughts, all my feelings, all my perspective, because you love me, right? And when we tell someone, I love you, but I don't accept that, I love you, but I won't allow you to do that here or to me or to them, or all of a sudden it's like, oh, you don't love me? Well, yes, I love you, but love and justice are together. And we look at God's nature and we want to borrow the love, but leave the just part behind. But rebellion is always alone, and that alone is always going to come due. Many of us over a certain age, I don't even know what that is anymore. I used to think I knew, but now I'm that age, so I don't know. But you have borrowed credit, you have taken things from a store, and you didn't have to put a single dollar on it for the next 12 months. And after month 6 or 7, you're like, man, this is awesome. Someone comes in and says, oh, is that yours? Did you buy? Yeah, this is my TV, this is my couch, this is my bed, this is my living room suite, this is my whatever the thing is. The truth is, it is not mine. And if I don't make a payment, it's going to be taken from me. And rebellion is alone. It's me saying, God, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I believe you love me too much to do anything about it. And Paul wrote and said, do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. You will reap what you sow. It's not just a matter of I slept in, so I missed the meeting, and just A equals this and B. Like, no. He said, God is actually involved in this, because in many ways we are robbing him when we try to live that way. So rebellion is alone. The second part of that, though, is critical. Because if we just see this as don't do this, don't do that. If we just see the principle of sowing and reaping as a way to not do bad things, then I think we've missed the bigger picture, because it's about things that we do for him as well. So the second phrase is obedience is an investment. Just as rebellion is a loan that it's going to have to be paid, obedience is an investment that is going to have a reward that's coming down the road. It's coming later. It's not going to be maybe today, but it is on the way. And every single thing we do, every act of obedience, every time you trust God and say, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it because you said it's right. I don't feel this way, but I'm going to do this because I want your favor in my life. I'm not sure that I can even have the strength to pull this off, but I'm going to do this for you. Anytime that happens, it is an investment. And God doesn't miss any of it. And he says, the reward is coming to you. I am putting my stamp on it. I'm putting my name on it. When I tell you something's going to happen, I'm going to bring it to pass. And I'm telling you, there's going to be a reward. That's why Paul wrote, do not become weary in doing the right thing, because in time, there will be a harvest for it if we don't give up. Now, if I'm a follower of Jesus and I choose rebellion, I choose selfishness, I choose to do my thing, what is it that I'm actually going to ultimately pay? What is the cost going to be? Now, if you're a follower of Jesus and you're doing that right now, I want you to know that it's not necessarily going to be a situation where one day you're going to wake up and God's going to say, you have to go to hell. That's not the thing. I wish maybe sometimes I was more afraid of that. Maybe it would be more deterrent. But he says, no, you're free. I've set you free. I've written your name in my book. But from this point forward, this choice to live freely is ultimately going to affect peace. It's going to affect favor. It's going to affect blessing. It's going to affect opportunity. There are times when God looks around for someone to use. The Bible says that his spirit roams the earth looking for someone who's all his. And he works through those people. And sometimes I wonder if there are times when God had a plan to use you in a certain moment. But as God's Spirit evaluated your heart, you were nowhere close to paying attention, much less being ready to be used. So he used someone else. And those are those moments when we sit back and see God do something big and we see who he used and we go, what in the world? Why would God do that through him? Why her? I can't believe that. And sometimes I wonder, in the whole story, was that maybe supposed to be my spot, but I wasn't paying attention? I wasn't honoring him in that moment. I wasn't ready. My heart wasn't in the right position. I wasn't physically in the right because I was doing my own thing. We miss out on opportunity. Sometimes we miss out on favor. God has said what he's going to bless. And when I'm doing things that are contrary to what he's blessing, there's no promise there. God says, this is the kind of relationship that I want you to have. Well, I'm going to have this kind of relationship with this kind of person because I'm attracted, or we get along, or I'm going to make money off this business deal, this venture, in this relationship, or whatever it might be. And God said, well, I don't honor that. So you're on your own. I'm not going to split the skies and send a lightning bolt and jack up your life or hurt you. I'm taking my hand off of you. You're not going to have my blessing on this. I will not bless that. So it's opportunity or favor, peace. It could be a bunch of stuff. But we miss out when we're followers of Jesus and we don't pay attention to this. But the obedience is the investment. And there's not a single thing we can do for him that God misses out on. And there's always a return coming. Not too long ago, I called the guy that's my financial advisor. I know I look just like someone who has a financial advisor, right? But I have a financial advisor, and we started talking about the future. And his question to me was, he said, well, how much money do you want to have when you retire? Like, how much do you want? I thought, how can that be a question? Like, how much do you want? Like, are you ready to write this down? Because the number is big. Like, it is really big. But what he was getting at was, if you want it to be here, then now we work back to where you are and we see how we get there. And there are times I have to remind myself that I've got a good financial plan together. And it was something I started when I was 21 or 22. When I thought, I'm married, I don't want to work till I'm 90 years old. I got to figure this thing out. And so I began investing then. And I have to remind myself of that, because if I look at my savings and my checking right now, the account numbers, it looks like I will have to work roughly 78 more years. Like, that's to be able to retire. That's what it looks like. But I have to remind myself that I've been investing this entire time. And no, it's not $10 million coming, but there's enough where we're going to be able to live. God's going to continue to be able to provide because I've did the wise thing at this point. But I don't have it with me now. It's not here. And my wife and I have had many, we'll call them encouraging discussions about our future finances. And she's like, well, where is it? I'm like, it's in that company and that, like, but where is, I promise it's coming. It's an investment. Now, my word doesn't hold the weight that God's word holds, obviously. And so me telling her that is not the same. But God's word says, if you invest, if you will trust me enough to let your life plans match the plans that I have for you, you will have a return on your investment, more than you could ever imagine. So the question that I believe as we read through this that God's Spirit's asking us today is, well, how much do you want? How much of my favor do you want on your life? How much of an opportunity do you want me to give you? How big a door of opportunity do you want me to open for you? How much blessing do you want on your finances or on your family, on your home, on your relationship? How much of me do you want? Because it's totally up to you. As much as you'll give me, I will give you back more. You cannot outgive me, but you've got to trust me in this. And every time you do, you can trust the reward is coming. And so for those of you who have laid in your bed at night, crying over what's going on around you and wondering, is it worth it? I've done the right thing, but I still get passed over. I've prayed and I've prayed and I've prayed, but he still won't say yes to you. I've tried so hard, but this still isn't working. I'm doing everything I know to do to honor you, God, with my life, and yet I still feel like I'm on the outside. I'm not experiencing everything. Paul writes and says, just hold on. Hold on. Do not become weary in doing what you know is the right thing to do, because at the proper time, God is going to unload. Now, I hope we don't have to wait until we're all of retirement age to experience the blessings that God has for us. But I trust him enough that if that's what it takes, if I have more years of waiting, that there's going to come a moment when I'm going to be so thankful that I didn't jump the gun and say, I'll just do it my own way. and miss out on his favor, miss out on peace, miss out on the blessings and the opportunities. Because God promises that every moment that we trust him is an investment.